Okay, for those who haven't downloaded Lockdown, you have to go to Modules, Exams, and click Testing Responders. When you click on it, if you don't have responders, then please, I need people to say, I'm recording. All right, so let me do this again. So for those of you who have, so it's gonna take about 5 minutes to download Lockdown. Once you have it downloaded, then you can click Begin, and it will ask you a very simple question. Are you a UM student? Click True, Submit, and then it will say you got your answer right, and if that's what if you get this, then you're done. Okay? Now, if you're not a UM student, then you'll get it wrong. Okay, so I'm gonna pause this a second. So first of all, the exam so here under, so this one is 301, under class, so everything is in modules. So in modules, you have marketing class slides, which is basically the presentation that I use, so you have access to what I'm gonna be using right now. You can test it, make sure that it works. And then the other thing is right under that slide presentation, I'm gonna put the video of the review that I'm doing right now, okay? So now what I will not review today is the case studies, but you're responsible for the case studies. So there will be questions about the case studies. If you did the assignments and you attend the class during the case studies, then you should be fine. If you did the case studies using AI, then I recommend that you read them. Okay, so my presentation just, let me open it again. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so basically this exam is about these two sections: analyzing the situation, okay, and defining customer value. So the analyzing the simulation has the 5 C's, and then defining customer value is STP. Now, it doesn't mean that there is nothing about the 4 P's. It's just that the 4 P's we haven't gone into depth yet. That's what we're gonna do after the midterm exam, okay? So something that is important is to understand a little bit of what these two gentlemen said. So Theodore Levitt, he's considered the father of marketing, and he's the first one that talked about customer needs. So he said, you know, instead of a 1/4-inch drill, we want a 1/4-inch hole. So if you follow, so marketing, basically, most of marketing, and this is important, most of marketing follows that philosophy of focusing on the needs, but not all of it, okay? So let me give you an example. One of the case studies that I like to do, I don't know if we'll have time to do it here, we may, is Bose. Bose, you know, he was an MIT professor. He didn't do any customer research. He just developed the best possible product he could develop and invented noise cancellation. Dyson invented the best power blower that is then used for many things that exists. So some people just do the best product and then figure out a way to sell the product. Henry Ford, you know, even though the need was transportation, he he basically, you know, invented the Model T. Steve Jobs, a lot when he did the iPhone, he wasn't thinking, okay, people need a touchless screens. No, on the contrary, nobody wanted a touchless screen. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because in business, there is not such a thing as a rule that you cannot break. You can break the rules. However, if you're focused on customer needs, then you're basically following, the Theodore Levitt's marketing myopia. So marketing myopia means that sometimes you focus on the product and forget the benefits. Now, that may work or may not work. Okay. Now, Kotler. So actually, before Kotler, and even before Theodore Levitt, you guys probably heard that the father of modern management was Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker was the first person, even before the marketing term was invented. He said the purpose of a business is to create a customer. But later on, Philip Kotler said, well, the purpose of marketing is to create customer value. And customer value is a concept that we start this course with, and that is very important to understand what customer value is. He also has all this thing about satisfying, he has many quotes, right? Satisfying needs of the target market, and then the other thing that he emphasized is doing it at a profit. Now, again, for everything there is exceptions. There is companies that are non-profit, so not everything is for a profit. And as we'll see in a second, some companies, they are not, a lot of times their main purpose is not profits. Okay, so basically the 5 C's and STP is what we've been focusing on this class. Now, when we think of customer value, remember customer value, basically the way it works, this value equation is you have a product. So let's say you come up with some product. You figure out how much does it cost you to make the product, which is your cost of goods sold. And then you price it a little bit higher, or you price it higher. Now, what happens if you price a product or a service higher than your cost of goods sold and it doesn't sell? What's the problem with the price? It's too high. So you have not created enough value. So your price needs to be below the perceived value. Otherwise, they won't buy. But like everything, there is exceptions. If you have no other choice but to buy the product, even if you're very unhappy, you may have to buy it. So remember during the pandemic where there was a scarcity of everything? Yeah, some people paid $10 for a roll of toilet paper. So even though it's not worth that, there is exceptions. But under normal circumstances, you're not going to pay more than what you think something is worth. So marketing basically has the main purpose of marketing is, okay, how do we increase this perceived value? And that's where all these marketing efforts come. Now, a good way to think about customer value is where people are willing to pay, okay? So we had this example first day of class or second day of class to illustrate customer value. So I asked some of you, how many of you are willing to pay, about double for coffee in Starbucks and McDonald's? And most of you raised your hand. And when I asked around, well, why, if we think of the 4 Ps, okay, you said, well, in terms of product, you can customize it, better coffee beans, you have a bunch of variety of drinks that McDonald's doesn't have. In terms of promotion, I use my app so I can order ahead, I get points. In terms of place, I can, if I need to get some homework or work done, it's a place where I can relax, usually clean, and that's why I'm willing to pay more. Okay, so that's you, but you're not everybody. The McDonald's user says, I'm not willing to pay more. First of all, I drink regular coffee. I go in the morning, McDonald's gives me more breakfast options. Okay. I don't care about your app because I use the McDonald's app. And by the way, I use the drive-through, so I don't care too much about how comfortable the place is. So you can see how customer value is relative to the target or the person's needs. So not everybody's gonna, obviously then nobody, by the way, McDonald's I think sells more coffee in the morning than Starbucks, just so you know. So it all depends on the customer. So basically we have the 3Ps: product, promotion, place, and we're gonna spend a lot of time talking about all these things because product also includes branding, okay, and brand image. These are called the marketing mix levers to create value. Price is how you extract value, okay, because you're basically doing an exchange, right? I'm giving you a service, in exchange you're paying me for that service. So it's very important. So that's the customer value equation. All right. So our whole class has been organized using this framework. Now, what I recommend for the exam is read these chapters that are here, but if there is something in the chapter that you never heard in class, don't worry about it, okay? Because, but my slides, some of my slides are from the book, and I just show a table. I don't explain it, in the slide. So people say, oh, should I just go with a slide presentation? Well, if there is a graph or a table there and you don't understand what it is, you need to look at the book, okay? Unless you recorded the class when I explained it. But I'm gonna go over the most important stuff right now. Okay. So one of the things that is important is this difference between needs, wants, and demands. So in terms of needs, okay, we have this psychologist. Is anybody here a psychology major, by the way? Usually in my marketing class, I have some psychology. So this is like the only psychologist in marketing that is in every first chapter of every marketing book. Maslow. He said there is a hierarchy of needs, and typically you want to meet your basic needs before you worry about social and esteem needs. But it turns out that that's not the case, because what happens is we may have safety needs at any time. So let's say, you don't worry too much about safety needs, but all of a sudden you get sick. So that's why you have advertising that basically goes after each of those needs, right? It goes after all of those needs because we can have them simultaneously at any time. Now, wants is part of the needs, but it's then motivated by everything that has affected you in terms of what we'll see later, culture and all this stuff. So, for example, I need transportation, but somebody wants a pickup truck, or somebody wants a sports car, or somebody wants an SUV. Somebody prefers Toyota. So wants are really it goes beyond basic needs. It's really affected by the whole environment that it surrounds you, which we're going to talk about more in a second. Now, market is basically all the buyers in a potential market. So you have two things. You have market and market potential. Market is all the people or products in a particular market. Market potential is the market could be small and could become much bigger. So, for example, in the case of EVs, when Tesla entered the EV market, it was tiny, but now is much, much larger, and it keeps on growing. Let's see. So in marketing, typically when we talk about needs, it's what is called the marketing concept. But as we talked about before, it's not always based on needs. So for example, there is some production of products, which is the production concept, where the perfect example is, the AirPods, right? Somebody says, I don't need to focus on more needs. I just need to focus on this successful product and make it as low cost as possible. So you go to Temu or whatever, and you find something that looks like this for like $30. So those are people who are focused on cost, and usually that's called a low cost strategy. Then you have the product concept. So this is what I was telling you before. Somebody just focuses on making the best product, and then customers or users go to that product. So if you're doing like a super PC or super machine, they're just focusing on making the best product. Now, selling concept focuses on discounts, right? So and promotions. Marketing is really obviously needs and wants, and then societal is what's best for society. So we have this issue going on right now. I don't know if you read in the newspapers with Ben and Jerry's. Originally, Ben and Jerry's, when it was founded in Vermont, it was basically what's best for society, what's best for local farmers. It wasn't really much focused on profit at all. And Unilever acquired them, and the condition was that the founders could manage it the same way they've always managed it. But it turns out now they quit because they said that Unilever is not allowing them to do that. Plus, they also claim that Unilever is involved in politics. Bottom line is societal marketing is when you're not there for really profits or customer needs. So then you really have essentially two ways to design a customer value strategy. So the marketing is kind of what we've been doing. You look at the market, the needs, and then you figure out a way to fulfill those needs better than your competition. The selling concept, this is kind of the product, right? The product is you start with a product, and then you figure out how to sell that product. So instead of focusing on the customer, somebody gives you a product, a really good product, and then say, okay, now you figure out how to sell it, okay? So again, typically we have society needs or nonprofit needs, consumer satisfaction, and then the company usually cares about profits when it's for profit, okay, not society. Okay, so let's just, so here there is another thing that we talked about that is really important. All customers are not good customers. And when I mean about customers, I'm talking about in terms of profitability. So now that doesn't mean that you should fire your customer unless there are extreme circumstances, but you don't do marketing to all customers the same way. So if you have a customer that is already profitable and loyal, then approach it softly. If you're already loyal to Apple and you're a very profitable customer, I'm not going to bombard you with advertising. Because if you do that, first of all, you're wasting money, and second of all, it may actually backfire. Now, if you have customers that are profitable but they're not loyal, right, then you want in the short term to do a hard sell, because basically, these are profitable customers but they're not loyal yet, so you want to make them loyal. Now, the ones that are unprofitable and very loyal, you need to be careful with those, because what happens is those are the ones who buy only when you're discounted. So the problem with that is that then you want to be careful how you handle those customers in terms of marketing that you spend. And then you have strangers. These are not profitable or loyal, so in those you don't spend anything. They are not loyal and they are not profitable. So why are you going to spend money on them if they're not even profitable? The unprofitable ones and loyal, you have to be careful because they are only going to buy you when you're on sale. So you want them to be loyal, but you don't want to spend a lot of money in marketing them because they're already taking advantage of all the marketing you spend. If they're profitable but disloyal, those are the ones you want to spend the most on because you want to make them loyal. And then if they're profitable and loyal, then you approach them softly because you really don't need to spend a lot of money on them. It could backfire. Okay, so So big companies like P&G do a lot of research because they are trying to find something called a consumer or customer insight. Consumer insight is information that you find out from your research that then you can use in developing new products or developing new advertising. And these are usually insights that are not obvious, they're usually unique. So if you see an ad and you're like, wow, that ad was really creative and it's really relevant to the product and all that, that's because it came probably from some sort of consumer insight. So there is a lot of resources spent on research, and especially big companies have a whole section of how they do the research. A lot of it is already internal, but they're constantly doing things like monitoring the customer satisfaction of their products versus competitors. Again, a lot of them have databases so they can monitor what those customers think over time. So the marketing research process, you always start with defining the problem and what is the objectives. So I think I told you that when I worked at P&G, I would go to a marketing research department and say, look, I need some research. And like, no, do a marketing research request, because basically it costs money. So you need to justify why you're doing this research. So he said, well, I work for Crest and Colgate is eating my lunch, so I need to know why. So that may be the problem and the objective. You want to know what's going on with Colgate. Why are they beating you? Maybe there is something that you haven't found out. So you collect the research, and then based on the information that you collect, then you can make changes to your marketing mix. Okay, so maybe there is something that Colgate did. So I think I told you guys that typical example is they improved the whitening product, and now it's outperforming Crest whitening product, and you're losing customers to Colgate. So then we need to improve our whitening product, okay, or do something. Okay. I didn't put a star on this one, but maybe I should. So let's see. So there is different types of research, and I'm not gonna you don't need to know all of them, but one that is becoming very popular is observational and ethnographic research. So, and this is a particularly important for startups. So a lot of the research used to be this long surveys that would take forever. But now observational research becomes a lot more important, or watching how consumers interact in their natural environment. So for startups, this is particularly important because you have a prototype and you want to see if they even know how to use it or how they interact with it. And in the case of, I think we saw here the video, the P&G Pantene video, where they basically have this scale right when they get out of the shower, and then they have an app and they answer right away. So, obviously they don't do research while she's taking a shower, but as close as possible to that moment, because then you have it fresh on what you like, didn't like, and so the closer you are to the natural moment, the better. So one of the most famous companies that started doing this was Intuit. So they invented Quicken before they did QuickBooks, and basically Scott Cook, who was an ex-P&G brand manager, started this company, and by the way, became a billionaire, and basically said, I want everybody in their marketing research and development just to observe how people interact with the product. And that's how they kept improving the product. They realized that people were not doing this or couldn't figure out how to do this or do that. So they became one of the pioneers of doing this type of research. Okay. So if you remember, this was the video where people wear glasses and they can see where people are looking at. So now this is done a little bit differently. So there's sensors and cameras everywhere that detect where your eyes are looking, because a lot of what we do is subconscious. Sometimes we go to the supermarket and we don't even remember or consciously know what we're looking at. So this is Okay. So another very common technique are called A/B tests. We'll talk about this when we do digital marketing. So you can do 2, 3, or many versions of the same post or same ad and test it simultaneously with Google or Meta Manager. So there's many types of research techniques, but you have basically big categories. So you have quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative is something that is not statistically valid, like focus groups, okay? Quantitative, usually large sample, has a statistical significance, but sometimes you just do focus group because you need something quick. Maybe you're screening ideas and you want to narrow it down. Now, some companies think that focus group is enough. I've been trained that really isn't, because a focus group is representative for what. If I do a focus group here, you're not even representative of the whole University of Miami, right? So typically focus groups are not statistically representative. So those are two big categories. The other two big categories is primary and secondary research. Primary research focuses on when you do the research yourself. So you're doing a survey, so that's all primary. Focus group, anything that the company does, that's primary research. Secondary research is what you can find online. It's like publicly available, okay? So here's where it gets interesting, because in the past, when it comes to when it comes to a lot of what customers or consumers thought about your product, it was through primary research. There wasn't, Nielsen or any of these companies didn't publish this confidential data that companies spend a lot of money on. But now, with digital marketing and social media, you can see the comments that people leave in review sites or in social media. So a lot of this is now considered secondary research because it's available to everybody. So a lot of it, this is what is called online listening or social listening. So this is stuff that you can find online. Okay, so we already talked about the quantitative, qualitative. We'll talk about customer relationship management when we talk about sales. I'm not going to talk about that. Now, big data is just a term that there is a lot of data out there. So imagine for big companies and big brands, there is thousands of mentions every day, sometimes every hour. So big data is a term. You have so much data that then you need a way to not only capture this data, but also be able to analyze it. So that now is being done a lot with AI. Okay, so if you remember when we talked about needs and wants, needs are fundamental needs that we all have for different things, but wants are affected by kind of your brain, okay? So we all have all these stimuli, but we react in different ways. The responses could be very different in terms of attitudes and preferences. And the other thing is, some people are early adopters and they're fine with buying a product, even if it hasn't been fully tested. So we have now, like the new iPhone, I hear a lot of complaints about especially the Pro, that it has a lot of issues. But some people said, look, I want to get it first. I don't mind. Now, the early and late mainstream say, no, I rather see for people who use it for a while, and then once Apple figures it out and fixes all the issues that it has, then I'm in the market. Now, some people are even more risk averse, okay? These are the late majority. These are people who basically say, well, I'm not going to buy it until a lot of people have bought it and they tell me what they think about it. Okay, we already talked about Maslow. So this is a very important chart because it summarizes really well what are all the things that could affect your wants and your consumer behavior. So you have them in different groups, right? So you have culture and subculture. So again, food, for example, subculture is very important. If you're Hispanic, or you probably have a preference for Hispanic food. By the way, there is not such thing as Hispanic food because every country has different food. So Venezuelan, you like Venezuelan food like me. Also social class, so that would be part of cultural. Now social, even though is a different category, this is really more your family, your social networks, your groups. Not social class refers to like, income, income demographics. And then you have personal, different stages of your life cycle. You change your occupation. You're working now, I don't know, in Wall Street investment banking, and you want to dress and do what everybody else does. Economic situation. The better your economic situation, maybe you can afford other things. Personality and so on. So these are, you can see all of these things can be very different depending on the people. And then you have the psychological piece, which is motivations, perceptions. And I highlight beliefs and attitudes. Beliefs and attitudes, and we see it, and I don't want to get into politics, but we see people that have completely different beliefs and attitudes for the exact same product. So these are things that are, so there is a saying, perception is reality. So if somebody thinks that the sky is orange and you see it blue, well, you're not going to change their mind. So these are things that are psychological. Now, one thing that is really important is understanding the buying decision process. Now, the buying decision process can be long if you have a high involvement product. High involvement product means, like the word says, something that is expensive. For example, something where you're buying a car, you're buying a house, college, or you have the opposite, low involvement products. So you don't spend a lot of time thinking when you buy, a bottle of water, or when you're buying what you do routinely, which is the stuff you buy in the supermarket. So this buying decision process, need recognition, information search, evaluating alternatives, and then purchase and post-purchase could be a long process, again, if you're buying like a car, and it could be super short process if you're buying something routinely and it's low involvement. So one of the things that we do now, and it's very common, it used to be, when I started marketing, it was called the consumer profile. Now you'll hear the term persona. In the past, having a consumer profile was useful, but you couldn't do much with it. Now, knowing not only the demographics, but the objectives, challenges, objections, hobbies, interests, is very useful information because you can target them based digital marketing on all these things. And we'll see that in more detail when we go. So a very important concept is called the customer journey. So there is two major things in marketing that are widely used: the marketing funnel and the customer journey. And the marketing funnel has what is called the top of the funnel. The top of the funnel, so think of this funnel, vertical instead of horizontal. The top of the funnel is the awareness stage, okay? Is you become aware of something new, or maybe of a product that you know, but there is something going on that you didn't know. Then you have the interest and consideration stages. Those are the middle of the funnel. And that is the toughest thing in marketing. If I bombard you with advertising, eventually you're going to say, okay, I know. I know that you exist. But that doesn't mean that you're interested or you're considering buying. So marketing is really, hard part of marketing is really the interest and consideration stage. Is how do I convince you to actually buy? So that's the middle of the funnel. The bottom of the funnel is conversion, which typically is purchase conversions, okay? Now, once you buy, it doesn't end there, okay? Marketing is not only about getting you to buy, but keeping you loyal, because your most profitable customers are your loyal customers. Not only that, your loyal customers can go to the next stage, which is advocacy, and become brand ambassadors. In other words, they will promote your brand. Okay? So this is the marketing funnel. So the difference between the marketing funnel and the customer journey is that the customer journey is the different actions, touch points, behaviors that you take through the marketing funnel. So here we have, let's say, you saw some ad. If you ignored it completely, maybe you were just indifferent. If it was a relevant ad, then you had a positive experience, and then you clicked on the ad in your social media, and all of a sudden you're in the landing page. Then the landing page, looking at the product, and now you're going to consider if you're going to buy it or not. Okay, so that's the interest and consideration. If you buy it, then that means that you're now in the conversion. There is many versions of the customer journey, but they all have the funnel, they all have touch points, and they all have some sort of action or responses. Okay, so let's keep on going. So the other thing to recognize is that B2B, which is business to business, is different than consumer markets. Okay, so B2B, usually, you're closer to the customer, it's more technical, the emphasis is on sales as opposed to advertising, distribution is usually regional or very short. Buyer relationships are super important. So when you have companies, some companies have relationships that goes for decades. Purchase decision process can involve many different people, right? If somebody's selling to University of Miami, maybe you have IT, you have the faculty, students, the president. So the decision-making unit, you have users, influencers, buyers, deciders, gatekeepers. So business to business can be very complex. But even in consumer products, if you think about it, like for some of you when you were kids or when you live at home, maybe you had an influence on the decision of what groceries your parents bought, but at the end of the day, they were the ones who bought it. They were the buyer, and so you were an influencer. When I was a kid, I didn't have much influence, but now I think change. Okay, so influencing business buyer behavior sometimes is a little different. It's not so much psychological and all that. Has to do more with things that affect the company and the strategies of the company. So the buying decision process of a business can actually be very long and complicated. So when I worked in consulting, well, I still do, but now actively, it was a really long process, like a request for proposal or RFP, then you fill out all this information, and then you make a proposal, then that goes through a bidding process, and so it can be a very long, complicated process. Okay. So one of the things that we did is evaluating the user experience of a website using these guidelines, but don't worry about that for the exam because we're going to cover this more detail when we do digital. Okay, so now let's focus on context, and we're going to go quicker now because consumer is the more complicated one. For context, basically we have two frameworks. PESTEL, okay, which is political, economic, social, technological, legal, environment. I'm not going to go through all of these now. We did it all in class, and they're pretty obvious. And then you have this industry structure, which is called the 5 forces. These are Michael Porter's famous 5 forces to determine the attractiveness or profitability of an industry or a market. So what he said basically is, you should focus not only on your direct competitors, but you need to focus on 5 forces. So the rivalry among the existing competitors, the threat of substitute products, the threats of new entrance into the industry, the bargaining power of buyers and the bargaining power of suppliers, because this determines the profitability of the industry. So a quick example would be that he used in the interview that we saw was airlines. So he said airlines are very unprofitable because there is a huge rivalry among different airlines. You have, as a buyer, you have a lot of bargaining power because you have many airlines to choose from. You can go on your phone and find which has the lowest cost. Bargaining power of suppliers, where there's only like two makers of airplanes, Boeing and Airbus. So it's not like you have a lot of bargaining power as an airline to choose. Threat of substitute products. We have like speed trains all the time. So here in Florida, for example, Brightline is becoming a threat to some of these airlines. And then new entrants are new airlines all the time. Every time I go to Miami International Airport, there's like a bunch of airlines that I had not seen in the past. So that makes it a very unprofitable industry because all of the dynamics are negative, okay? So, okay, we talked about pestle. So all these things are external factors. And when we think of a SWOT analysis, external factors are those things that create either opportunities or threats. Okay, opportunities or threats come from external factors. Strengths and weaknesses are from your own internal factors. So these are external factors. Okay, so this is context. Now, when we look at the company, then we need to look at our own strengths and weaknesses. Now, in order to look at your own strengths and weaknesses, you need to compare to somebody. So you compare usually to your competition. If you have a strength that is very difficult to copy, then that becomes what is called a competitive advantage, or some people call it a moat, famously coined by Warren Buffett. Sometimes you'll hear, what's your secret sauce? Again, it comes from like Coca-Cola, I guess. So you have something unique that is very hard to copy. And when you analyze strengths and weaknesses, you do it holistically, right? So you look at your capabilities in terms of innovation, your supply chain, financial management. So in the case of Walmart, the case study that we did, in the U.S., they couldn't transfer a lot of those strengths that they have in the U.S. into China because China was a completely different environment. So, for example, in the U.S., their biggest advantage is supply chain. They're more efficient than anybody. But in China, they couldn't replicate it, especially at the beginning, because they don't have that many stores. They don't have the same suppliers. It's a completely different environment. So when it comes to competition, okay, Michael Porter used to say the best way to understand your competition is to act as if you are the competition. So be your competitor. So understand everything about your competition as if it were you. And I always like the analogy of sports, right? So football particularly, they spend hours and hours looking at film of their competition to see what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and try to figure out how to beat them with that. So so that's competition. So again, to review Porter, he basically says, okay, in order to create a competitive advantage, first thing you need to do is understand the industry with the 5 forces, and then figure out a way to position yourself within that industry. And so here's the profitability of the different industries. So you can see airlines is all the way at the bottom. And then he says, well, you really have 2 choices, lower cost or differentiation. And we'll talk more about that when we go to positioning. So let's jump now. Okay, so one thing that is important also is we did the South Beach Cafe example. So that was to, okay, how do you organize a SWOT? So again, a SWOT is strength and weaknesses are internal factors. opportunities and threats are external factors. And why is this useful? Well, because sometimes you have so much information that you want to organize it and to focus on the key things. And when you do that, then you can start coming up with different solutions or strategic options. So these are the TOWs. The TOWs is, okay, if I have this strength and we have these opportunities, can I take advantage of some of those opportunities? Or if there is a threat, given the strengths that I have, what can I do to defend versus that threat? And in terms of my weaknesses, well, if I have a weakness that may not let me take advantage of the opportunity, and if there is a threat, and that happens to be my weakness too, then I'm in big trouble. Because so one of the things with South Beach Cafe is, you have this healthy trend, but you don't have anybody there who does. So a weakness is they don't do healthy things. But then strategy is all about making choices. It doesn't mean that automatically you're going to do healthy dishes. That's up to you. So that's why business is difficult, because there is no necessarily right or wrong answer. Okay, so now we go to this second part that we did. So the first part was the analysis part, understanding the 5 C's. The second part is STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. So let's see. I'm looking for a slide. Okay, so this slide, sorry, let me move this slide. This slide should be here. Sorry, Cutler, I'm gonna get rid of your slide because I like my slide better. Okay, so segmentation, targeting, and positioning. So what is segmentation? You have this huge market and you need to segment it into different groups. And this can be done in several ways, which we'll talk about in a second. By the way, sometimes most of these markets are already segmented. Automobiles, you have all these segments and sub-segments that have existed for years. So most of the time, there is already a segmentation in place. Or if you go to the supermarket, almost any aisle or any category is already segmented. Now, targeting is about, okay, so there is all these segments, which ones am I going to target? And that is based on how attractive that segment is. And we'll go into that in a second. Then positioning is, okay, I already have these segments. I already know which ones I want to target. So how am I going to do that effectively? So how am I going to position myself to be successful in this segment? And that's the so-called value proposition. So value proposition is you have some value that you offer that makes you different or unique or less expensive than your competitors. If you're identical to your competitors, what's going to happen is you're going to fall into a price war, right? So you want to avoid that. So when it comes to segmentation, this is a very important slide, okay? You basically have 4 different types of segmentations. Geographically, that's very obvious. Demographic, which is the one that we are most familiar with. It has to do with age, gender, income, and so on. Now, the ones that are not so common are psychographics, which is mainly lifestyle and this AIO. AIO stands for activity, interests, and opinions. So these have to do, and I guess psychology, that's why they call it psychographics, personality, values, attitudes. So these are all the things that we talked about that, psychologically affects consumer behavior. And then you have behavioral, which is based on actions, how you behave. So maybe the benefits you're looking after, how you use certain products, the occasion, the stage you're in, if you're an early adopter or late adopter, life cycle of the product or life cycle of the person. So life cycle of the person, well, actually of the product. Life stage of the person is really more demographic. So if you're already, if you're a millennial or you're a baby boomer or you're later senior, then that would be considered demographic because it's mostly based on age. So those 4 are the big groups. They are the big groups on how you do segmentation. Now, the beauty of digital is that you can have segmentation that is a mix of all these things. You can have a target, people who are from a certain country, certain age, who like certain things, and who are looking for certain benefits. So that's the advantage of digital, that you can target across all of these different things. So these are the explanations I just gave you, so I'm not going to go over again. Okay, so let's talk about how do you decide which segments to target. So basically the way you do that is there's 3 dimensions. First, you look at the characteristics of that segment. So the size, the growth, profitability. But again, just like everything in business, there is no set rule. If the segment is very small, that doesn't mean that you don't go in. There is something called blue ocean strategy, which means I'm going to create this whole segment that didn't exist, right? So Elon Musk says, EV is tiny, nobody's there. I'm going to go and basically develop, and it's called blue ocean because then you dominate that segment. The problem is, if you're not able to grow that market or that segment, you can spend a lot of money and don't go anywhere. Now, if the segment already exists and is profitable, and decent size, like EVs is today, then you look at who is there already, right? So who are the competitors? What are their strengths? What are their resources? And how intense is the competition? So then we have this, as opposed to blue ocean, we have red ocean. Red ocean is when you have a lot of competition. I don't know where the red comes from. I don't know if it's like sharks or something. So you look at it and you say, okay, given all of those competitors and their strengths, let's look at now at myself. What is my objectives? What are my competencies? Competencies is another word for like competitive advantage. And you hear the term core competencies. And then what are my resources? I'm going to go in there and get into a bloody war with all of these. Well, maybe if you have something unique, maybe yes. If you don't, maybe you say, well, I'd rather compete in a different segment. So, for example, in the case of Elon Musk, he took a long time before deciding to get into the pickup truck segment, right? And then he came in with something drastically different. So when it comes to targeting strategies, you have many choices. One choice is, I don't care, I'm undifferentiated, same thing for all customers, or for all segments. Differentiated could be different products for each segment or different messages for each segment. So when we saw Zipcar, the Zipcar example, well, it's not like they have different cars for the baby boomers than they have for the millennials or Gen Z. It's the same car, but the message, the advertising, the media that they use is all different, right? One is AARP, which is retirees, and for you guys is the karaoke and all that social media stuff. And then you have one option could be concentrated or niche, which is usually the option for startups. You take a very small segment, okay, or a part of a subsegment, and you just focus on that and do the best you can in that. You also see that a lot in luxury, right? So luxury has a very small niche, and then you dominate that niche. Now, what's happening is we're moving towards micro marketing or one-on-one marketing. So this is kind of, well, with all this AI and recommendation systems, I just worry about what you consume and what other people like you consume. So I don't know if you heard the TikTok, the person who runs TikTok. By the way, you know that there is a deal being negotiated. It's going to be partly owned by Oracle and some private equity. And basically said, look, it's based on your behavior. The more you watch something, the more you get of the same thing. Same thing happens with like Netflix and so on. And then if you're not watching something, but you have very similar taste to other people, then it will recommend what other people are watching that you may watch. Okay, so let's talk more about strategic position. So we already talked about how to do segmentation, the 4 dimensions. We talked about targeting by looking at the assessment of each segment. We talked about differentiated versus undifferentiated versus niche. Now let's talk about strategic position. So here we go back to Porter. He said lower price or differentiation. So you need to create what is called a unique value proposition. And so you need to look at the customer needs, the channels, the products, and then your relative price versus competitor, and figure out what your position is going to be. Now, an easy way to see if you have basically the same positioning or overlap with your competitors is you can do some research in terms of how you're being perceived in terms of price and different dimensions, which you guys are doing for your projects. And if you're like on top of each other, that means you're not different. And you're going to end up competing on price. So I don't know if you heard, McDonald's just announced the new value meal, $8 for Big Mac, soda, and fries. And then Burger King announced a $5 value meal. So they are back into this price war, which only helps people who go to either one of them, but it doesn't help them because they're going to lose money with that. So when it comes to positioning, then one way to figure out what the positioning is to try to write what is called a positioning statement. And the positioning statement is basically focuses on who are you targeting, right? So the brand, obviously, what brand you are, who are you targeting? What's your brand promise or benefit? Is there a reason to believe that you can deliver that promise, and in what market you're in? So, for example, you can say Pantene provides women 18 to 41-year-old healthy hair better than any other shampoo brand, and we do this with provitamin B5 or Pro-V. So that would be a positioning statement. So it turns out that you can usually figure out the position statement of a brand by looking at their advertising, particularly TV advertising, because TV advertising, again, you have more time. It's like 30 seconds or more. So we have this thing called strategic factors, which are the things that you look at to look how well they deliver or communicate their strategic positioning, and then you have executional factors. I'm not going to make you evaluate a TV ad for the exam because we're going to do that when we do advertising as part of the promotion part. And by the way, I wouldn't make you memorize something like this. I would give you the guidelines and just have you use it. So, but this is kind of how you do positioning. So there is winning and losing positionings. So the green ones, if you charge more but you have more benefits, then that's good. Now, if you have more benefits and charge the same or less, that's even better, right? Because consumers are going to be happy. Now, if you're charging less and you offer less, that's fine. You start getting in problems is when you have less benefits and you charge more, or when you have less benefits or you charge the same. And what happens is most of the time you find yourself in this yellow area. The yellow area is you're charging the same and you think you have the same benefits, but you don't. And what happens is then you get into these price wars. Okay, so this is again commoditizing. So I found this that I like very much. What consumers want, what your brand does best, what your competitor does best. So obviously you want what consumers want, but you also want what you do best, because if you're doing what consumers want, but you're doing what your competitor does best, then that's not good. And then if both of you do something really well, then this is risky, because again, you fall into undifferentiated. That's it. Okay. So any questions on anything? Yes?
What's like the format of the test? Is it all multiple choice?
No. So I don't remember if it was like 20 or 25 questions, multiple choice, true and false. And then there is going to be an essay. And so the essay will be something like the case studies, but very short. Okay? So my recommendation is, by the way, when I say the essay short studies, applying what you have learned in some sort of case study. So my recommendation is, what we just review. So go through the slides in the presentation. And then if you see a slide, you're like, what was this about? That's when you probably go into the recording, forward it to that section, see my explanation, okay? And then for the case studies, go back to your case studies. Look at what you wrote in the answers. If you took notes, what was discussed in class. Yes?
For the essay question, the case study, is it gonna be, like, we can read a case study on the test?
No, it's
It's
not.
gonna be from someone who's seen it?
It's not open book. It's okay. So that's what I'm saying. You need to be familiar with the case studies. Okay, but I wouldn't ask you like something where there is data in the case study that you have to. You know what I mean? If the case study is usually about a major problem that happened, and how you kind of go analyzing it and how they got to be successful, what happened, and then how would you solve it? And the part of how would you solve it, what I care is that you understand how to analyze and come up with certain strategic options or decisions. And I'm not gonna, in other words, if I don't agree with your solution, I'm not gonna deduct. It's fine. Everything can be done in many different ways, and some things work and some things don't work. Yes?
Should it focus on, like, small details or just, like, overall understanding? Like, how detailed, like, the memorization or, like...
Look, I don't like memorization, but there are some things that everybody knows. So, for example, if I say psychographics, I'm not asking you to memorize every single thing that is in that box, but you should know what psychographics is. So I say, well, one thing to remember when it comes to psychographics, you know that it has to do with something with psychology. So there is this thing called AIO, which is activities, interests, and opinions. So all the things that have to do with that. Okay? So again, it's about understanding, but once in a while, there is some terms you need to know what a target is. You need to know, you know what I mean? So, but I don't want you to memorize like the book definition or the way that is defined in the slide. I just want to make sure that you understand it. And by the way, I'm not a big fan of multiple choice, but the choices are very obvious. If you understand the concept, you'll see, which is the obvious answer to get it correct. Okay? So, any other questions? If anybody arrived late today, first of all, I did not take attendance, okay? But you need to download the lockdown browser. And the way you do that, and it's in the recording, is you go to modules, you click on testing responders. If you have responders, it will open. If you don't have it, it's going to tell you to download. Takes 5 minutes to download, and then you should be able to open it. Okay? All right, so we just finished recording, so that